Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and today I'm going to be doing another video, which is a reaction to a missionary video. Now, this one is by this another or same organization I did once before, or at least I think two or three times before, actually, called So Be It. And from what I understand, they may be some kind of extension of Jews for Jesus. So the video that I'm going to be talking about now is one they did called Messianic and Orthodox Jews discuss Jesus as Messiah. I'm not sure, but it appears to me that this video takes place in France, partially because the man you see in the picture on the right side is the Orthodox Jew that they're talking to. And by his accent, I kind of got the impression that he may have been French, but I'm not quite sure where it took place. So what I'm going to do is I just wanted to kind of show that this is the video I'm going to be looking at. And now I'm going to kind of basically get to the video itself so you can see what my reaction is to some of the things that are discussed during this video in particular. Now, again, it's important, when dealing with this, is that there's some ways that they kind of talk and the way that they discuss it that I kind of notice, some things about. And I kind of take, some issues with it. But I mean, again, I think that, because of the fact that this seems to be an edited video, meaning that they filmed it and then they kind of went back and kind of edited for their audience, for example. I have some ideas and thoughts I have about the way that this was kind of went down and some of the things that were said. So I'll start the video now, and you'll be able to kind of get my reaction as I stop through.
And I would encourage you to open the New Testament.
I know,
Okay,
I know.
maybe we'll do it. Why God sent Jesus?
And so if one of the missions of the Messiah is to bring the knowledge of the Torah to the world, not just to the Jewish people, to the world, we believe that he accomplished that. So I just wanted
Okay, so I want to stop it right here. Okay, so this is kind of just like a little bit of an introduction to what it is that's going to come up during this video, and just kind of my thoughts about some of it already. I think one of the things that I sometimes notice that happens, especially in these kind of interviews, I think that, most Jews who don't kind of know that what kind of questions the person's going to be asking might be caught off a little guard, sometimes off guard with these kind of questions because you want to be respectful. And there's some things that if you were to say it, you kind of feel, okay, well, they're publishing this, and it might come off in a mean way when I'm not trying to be mean. At the same time, you're just kind of coming to me off the street asking these questions. One of the things that I want you to notice when watching this is the terminology, because I'm real big on terminology, as anyone who watches my videos knows, because terminology can really determine what's going on. And I kind of suspect a little bit, because of the fact that the guy who's in the video who's an Orthodox Jew that is being interviewed by this guy here who's a missionary. I kind of get the impression that there may be some kind of elements of language barrier that may come up, but that's just my opinion. But I'll note kind of where I have issues with some of the languages used by the missionary and where he's incorrect in a number of things he says. But because he's speaking in English and he's not pulling out anything to give evidence of what he's talking about, he can kind of just say it and get away with it.
to see if you have an opinion about who you think Jesus is and what do you think he came to do.
Okay, so this first question, before he even answers, I find this to be a strange question because the thing is that when you talk about, the whole idea of what's being portrayed here, about the New Testament and Jesus, on some level, it doesn't matter what we Jews think about, what, this whole thing is about. Because, on some level, you're already assuming that we believe that there was such a person. You're assuming that we accept that the text is actually a text that's reliable and trustworthy. So there are certain situations where someone who's Jewish would have to kind of potentially react, and especially if it's a religious question, most Jews kind of have this idea, if that's what you believe it. We're not really entertaining or interested in it. So we're not here to tell you what we think about that for the most part. It's whatever you think it is, that's fine. But if you're asking us, no, we don't hold by it. We have some good reasons for it.
Yeah, so first of all, let's speak about Messiah.
Yeah,
Messiah is a Jewish concept.
right.
I mean, if there is no Judaism, we don't know about Messiah.
Yes.
There is a man who his job is to do, as you perfectly said, peace between God and man,
Right.
between man and man.
Right.
So this
Okay, so where I want to kind of interject here a little bit. He's right, but I think again the language issue is a big thing here because again one of the things you have to understand is that the concept being talked about is in Hebrew itself. So when you say Messiah, automatically in the English language, someone who is either someone who's not Jewish or someone who believes in Jesus, the minute you say Messiah, in their mind they're thinking of salvation. because, the idea of a Messiah is someone in the English language, at least, usually associated with the idea of some kind of type of salvation. Whereas I've said before in previous videos, when you deal with the word Mashiach, which is the actual Hebrew word used in the Tanakh, it simply means someone is anointed with oil. And it has no connotation to it that deals with someone who delivers you from something. It's just simply someone who's appointed to a position of leadership. And that's the concept. So, for example, in the Torah, it doesn't specifically say like the word Hamashiach dealing with, for example, someone who's of a Davidic line, someone who's a Davidic of ancestry. The only time that comes up is when he's talking about the Kohanim, a particular type of Kohen. So the thing is that I think that the first thing I would start out with is what's the definition of the word? And I would, basically move away from the idea of the English word having any relevance in the Jewish context. Now, of course, because we're speaking English, and I'm speaking English now, on some level, you do have to entertain the English language as people understand it. But if I were in his position, for example, I would clarify what it is when I use these terms. So for example, when a person says Judaism, Judaism is a word in Hebrew, Yahadut, which basically means, it's almost like saying the cultural practices of doing the Torah. Where modernly, when people hear Judaism, they're thinking of a religion, but that's not the way the word meant anciently within the Jewish context of the word Yahaduth. So this is where I would have to kind of lay down terms, knowing already that this is someone, the guy here is already a missionary, knowing that he already has this goal of he's not really just asking me these questions out of the blue just to know that there's a purpose of what he's asking. And you'll see the purpose later. I mean, again, these are videos in English for the most part. And they're directed, if you look at the people who make the comments, they're mostly directed at Christians. And I look now, I see at the bottom, this did take place in Paris. So let's continue.
This is a Jewish concept. So if we want to know what is Messiah, we have to look into Jewish books.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the important point. So this is a good job that he, the base of the guy here who's Orthodox did by saying, if you want to understand what the concept of what we're talking about is, you have to pull out, a Jewish book. Now, where I would have followed up and said, okay, well, we have to pull out the Tanach in Hebrew, because that's the starting point. So if we want to discuss this even further, let's pull up the Tanakh and see what it says in full context, and not just simply like piecemealing and quoting here and there, where you think something's relevant to this particular individual you've brought up. And I might say, okay, well, no, it's not. Well, let's actually look at what the Tanakh says as it is in plain sense, without any kind of, start here, the stop here. Because that's usually how someone who's kind of under this missionary concept, that's what they'll want to do. They'll want to look at one particular line, without the context of what came before it and after it. And there's no analysis of what this actually means in the Hebrew language and where do we get this information from of what it means. But at least, the guy does agree with him here because the missionary says yes. So this is where I would pull out the text and say, okay, well, if we're going to discuss this even further, let's pull out the text and read the text in Hebrew, not in translation.
Yes, we look into the Tanakh.
Yes. So one of the first things we learn when we go to Jewish school is that we receive the Torah in two formats: the written Torah and the oral Torah. In fact, the written Torah without the oral Torah, we cannot do anything, because, for example, it said on Sukkot, you should take the fourth species. Which species? Maybe I should take a watermelon. Maybe I should take, I don't know, strawberries. I don't know. If we don't have the oral Torah, we cannot know what we should do. Same for tefillin, and same for every mitzvah.
Okay.
And same for Messiah. So, who is talking about Messiah the best? I am sure you know.
Well, the Jewish people, and from the Tanakh.
But in the oral Torah, the explanation of the written Torah.
Rashi? You tell me.
Okay, now here's an interesting thing. The guy here who's Orthodox, does a good job laying all this out, that there, is a written Torah and oral Torah. And as you'll see a little bit later on, where I can tell already the missionary guy is kind of building up to try to say something about that, and he does say something about it eventually. One of the things I found interesting is when the guy who's Orthodox is mentioning the oral Torah and, mentioning this idea of learning from it, the first thing the missionary mentions is Rashi. Why specifically Rashi? Rashi's not the first source of information about what the oral Torah is. He's like one of many sources, and Rashi is one rabbi from one location out of France. But the guy here mentions, the Rambam, Maimonides, as people call him in English, but his name was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. And the reason why he mentions this, which is very good, is because the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, in the last book of the Mishnah Torah, dealing with Hilchot, what's called Hilchot Melachim, the Rambam basically lays out, how to understand the concept of Mashiach. Which is basically the better way of saying it in English would be a Davidic king, the one that we believe will kind of, bring Israel back to the Torah the way it's supposed to be in the land of Israel, which are two and very important points. It isn't simply, that's why I say that there's two different concepts at play here. One that the missionary has, which is the word Messiah means like some type of salvation, and the other one, which is basically from the Tanach, is that there will be an individual who's of Davidic ancestry through David HaMelech, the King David, and through Shlomo HaMelech, and that person essentially is a leader amongst the Jewish people who keeps Torah, teaches Torah according to both the written Torah and the oral transmission that has been accepted. Now, one of the things I would have mentioned right here is something that I think sometimes gets left out of the conversation, and I've noted it in a number of my videos. It isn't just a matter of that without the oral Torah, you don't know how to do any of the mitzvot of the written Torah, because essentially, if, what the missionary kind of builds up for is that, okay, well, that's what you say, but the written Torah is clear. And I would, I would say beforehand, and I would even return with this and say, okay, well, first of all, there's no way to even understand what the written Torah is, without an oral Torah. Meaning that if I pull up a Hebrew text right now, and, I won't do it for the sake of this video because of time, and put it in front of someone as it's written in a written Torah. Now, remember, ancient Hebrew had no vowel markings and it had no punctuation markings. Now, the first problem I run into is the written text of the Torah doesn't explain what the letters mean, what their sounds are. There's nothing in the written Torah that explain what the sounds of the letters are. That's the first problem. The second problem is that the written Torah does not explain what the meanings of words are. It doesn't give a dictionary of like how to understand the words in the Torah. The next thing is it doesn't explain the grammar of the Torah. It doesn't explain, like, for example, where a sentence starts and where it ends, with the exception of you could make an argument that in places where, there are certain breaks where it's pretty clear that it would start at a certain point, but it doesn't explain where it ends. It doesn't explain where you pause. So for example, you could actually change the meaning of the Torah by mispronouncing the text without the vowels. And I'll post in the description some videos I've made about this point where you could actually see what I'm talking about. And maybe even at the end of this video, I'll probably present something, or maybe in a part two, I'll kind of like recover that issue and kind of just pull out a Hebrew text and show that even this guy here, and I think he knows Hebrew because I think he's been here in Israel before, and I can't really tell if he's Jewish or not. I think he claims to be Jewish or something like that. The only way he learned Hebrew was to have learned it from someone orally, meaning that take any person off the street who's Jewish and put a Torah scroll in front of them and say, read this. This is a Torah scroll without the vowel points, without the grammar. The only way any person ever learned the Hebrew language is through an oral transmission. Now, the first question someone can ask is, and I've mentioned this in other videos, well, where do I get the information of what the words mean? If it's not in the written text itself, if it's not explained, and I have no way of reading the written text without someone explaining it to me, what's the earliest source for the meanings of words, the grammar, and what is actually the correct text of the Torah? Well, the earliest source of all that is the Talmud. There's no source prior to that, with the exception of maybe like Psalms, and even Psalms, Tehillim, you'd still need someone to explain to you how to read that because Tehillim or Psalms is written in Hebrew also, and it's written in a more later version of Hebrew, like a later date of Hebrew during the First Commonwealth. So the problem that you have when someone, is dealing with this, you'd have to pull that out too. So it isn't just a matter of, we don't know how to do what's written in the Torah without an oral Torah. It's that we don't even, nobody would know what the words even mean because there's no outside source with the exception of the Jewish people. And the earliest written source to describe what the text is, what the words mean, and what the grammar is the Talmud. There's no source previous to that, and there's no non-Jewish source that predates it. So all modern day, like non-Jewish dictionaries of the Hebrew language came from sources, people who sat down and kind of had to learn it from Jews. There was no outside source of material. Someone who wanted to know, like, for example, what the Torah says, had to have gone to a Jew at some point in order to get what the words mean, what the grammar is, and what the correct pronunciation is. And later on, they could decide, okay, I don't agree with the Jews. I want to like go this way with what I believe. That's where they would go. So I think that would be a very important point to bring up here. That even he, the missionary, can't claim that he learned Hebrew without it being from an oral source of someone who sat down and taught it to him. So if he pulls out a Hebrew text right now and tries to read it, what he's reading usually is going to be a text that has the vowel points marked in it, which were created about like maybe I think about 1,500 years ago or 1,400 years ago, something like that. And the ta'amim, the grammar that was added to it. Without that, he would never know how to read the written Torah or the Tanakh, any of it. And a good example of this is if you go to the Israeli Museum here in Jerusalem, there's a copy that's in this one area of the oldest like version I think of Isaiah of Yeshayahu, which is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It has A, no vowel markings on it. B, it has no grammar markings on it. And C, it has no verse markings or chapter markings on it. What that means is that when someone, let's say, for example, says, well, Isaiah 53, back during the Second Temple period, you would have never been able to say Isaiah 53 because there was no such thing as counting chapters and and verses in terms of, for example, marking it in the text. It was all oral of where does this like idea start and where does it end. So let's continue.
Maimonides.
Maimonides, Rambam.
Maimonides, Rambam. He has he has two chapters only about Messiah. Who is Messiah? And in fact, you're absolutely right. Messiah is a man. He's a man, and he will bring peace to the world. That's true.
Okay.
He will bring peace between God and man. That's true. But how he does that? He does that with the power of Torah. Means he will bring back the Torah to rule in the world.
Right.
Which means today we are doing Orthodox Jew. We are doing a lot of mitzvot.
Yes.
We're putting tefillin every day.
Yes.
By the way, you did today?
Not today.
Yeah. There is a very special place in the 17th.
We'll go there.
Yes. Okay. Very good. And you'll put tefillin there. Bezrat Hashem.
I'll be happy to.
Yes. And so we do a lot of things.
Right.
But we don't really feel the stuff. I mean, I put tefillin because it's written. When the Messiah will come, there will be a peace between what we know and what we feel.
Okay.
Okay, so where I would stopping here for a moment. I understand what he's getting at, and I think again there's an issue of a language barrier here. And where I would kind of go into this point a little bit more is that it's not a matter that we don't feel it. The matter is that we're not in the perfect situation to do the Torah as a whole. What do I mean by that? The goal of the Torah, if you look in any part of it, especially like when you look in Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, is eventually the people of Israel, would live in the land of Israel and do the mitzvot of the Torah in the land of Israel specifically, meaning that it's almost like having a home base of where the Torah is kept completely. This is not the current situation. The current situation is far from that. You still have a lot of Jews who either don't keep the Torah, you have Jews outside of the land of Israel, and even in the land of Israel, you don't have what's called a malchut of Torah. Meaning that one of the ideas is that when you have this Davidic king, his requirement is to establish, in the land of Israel, this government that's based on Torah. But that can only happen if the Jewish people want it, and it can only happen in the land of Israel. So that's kind of, I think, the point that he's getting at, and I think that's about to be misunderstood here with what the missionary talks about.
Can I comment on
Yes.
this? Okay, so when Jesus came, him and his followers, mostly his followers, brought the Torah, not the Talmud, the Torah, the Tanach.
Okay, so here's one of the problems that this is why I said you have to really get to the text. He says that, for example, that Jesus, he says Yeshua, then he says Jesus. And the first question I ask, well, which one is it? Who's it? Yeshua? Is it Jesus? Which one is it? Why two names? Why not just say one name and be done with it? If his name was Yeshua, then that's his name. His name's not Jesus, for example. Jesus, of course, would be like a Greek, a transliteration of a Greek transliteration, and which to me, I would say that identifies him as something foreign, because there's no reason to bring up that name in that way. So if his name was Yeshua, just call him Yeshua and be done with it. I understand Hebrew. The other issue is that okay, I'd say okay, wait a minute. You say he brought Torah and his disciples brought Torah, his students brought Torah. Give me the proof of this. Where's the proof that he brought Torah to who? Now the thing that, of course, somebody would say is, okay, well, it's in the New Testament. So here's where the problem that I would get into is, okay, so if we look, at the earliest like manuscripts of, what, or I guess like you could say fragments of manuscripts of the New Testament, I found this website here, which is on Bible Archaeology Report. And essentially, what it shows here is the four earliest New Testament manuscripts. Okay, so it says the following. All of the books of the New Testament were written within the lifetime of the death of Jesus of Nazareth. Not so the so-called other gospel, which were blah, blah, blah. So something difficult Gnostic works. So they're talking about the Gnostic Gospels. Excuse the fact that I can't pronounce that, but it's not my language. Written 100 or 300 years later. To date, we have over 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, with an astounding 2.6 million pages of biblical text. While some of these manuscripts are small and fragmentary, the average size of a New Testament manuscript is 450 pages. And add this to the ancient manuscript in Latin, Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, etc. Now, you notice here that there's no Hebrew. There's nothing here that says that there was any ancient manuscript they found in Hebrew. So this is important, especially when you say Hebrew and Jewish Aramaic. Why, if they were spreading the Torah, are none of these ancient manuscripts of the New Testament in Hebrew or Jewish Aramaic? So let's continue. Which number in the tens of thousands, and you realize that there is an embarrassment of riches when it comes to New Testament manuscripts. But again, if they were spreading Torah, there's no reason why they couldn't have done so in Hebrew and Aramaic if that's what they were trying to spread. Okay, so no other ancient text can compare with the New Testament when it comes to sheer volume of manuscripts, nor when we consider how close the earliest manuscripts are to the originals. So the question is, okay, well, the originals of what? So they start going through and showing the earliest papyra of the New Testament. Now, if you look at this like closely, like this is papyrus P90. This is in Greek. Now, again, if this missionary is right that they were spreading Torah, why are they doing so in Greek? The vast majority of the Jewish population in the Second Temple period understood Aramaic. That was like the spoken language of most of the Jews. And Hebrew would have been understood also. And we have from that same time period Jews who did not believe in Jesus or Yeshua, whatever they want to call him, who did not believe in him, who were able to preserve from the same time period text in Hebrew and Aramaic. So if we keep going down on this website, it shows like different manuscripts. I think the earliest one here is like from the book of John, and also it has a manuscript here, which is I think a lot of these are maybe within the first 50 years or something like that, of of the start of Christianity, at least the Jewish Christianity. But all of this is in Greek. And there's a like part of the thing Revelations or something like that in the book of John. These are the four oldest documents. So at the bottom of this page, it gives like a list of the different papyrus that they found of the New Testament. And again, like the time frame that it supposedly comes from. But again, all of this is in Greek, which brings up the point, okay, well, if they were trying to spread the Torah, why couldn't they have done that in the language that Jews spread Torah in, and which would have been available to them if they understood Torah? And again, when you read the New Testament, you don't see them spreading Torah. They're simply spreading, the ideas that were, supposedly, whatever, the followers of Jesus followed. Now, again, why should I accept that, the New Testament as a valid source of text? So that's another question, but we'll get to that in just a second. So when we look a little bit further, and say, okay, well, were there any texts that were, Aramaic as an example of the New Testament? Well, the earliest we can find are like things like the Peshito, which are basically from the church of the forms of Catholic churches that are from the Assyrian churches of the East. Now there's a history of that also, but none of these are really claimed to specifically be like texts that came from the Jews who supposedly believed in Jesus. And the reason why that's important is because we don't even know anything about those guys. The New Testament is the only thing that has a claim about them, but there's no other historical information from the time period that verifies that any of that information in the Gospels, for example, is even true. Let alone that, whatever like was said and done actually even happened. You would expect with, the claims made in the New Testament that there would be a large amount of Hebrew and Aramaic text from the followers of Jesus, rather than just like a bunch of stuff that's in Greek initially and that got translated into Aramaic. So I even looked a little bit further, and if you look on the net, I'll go to here. And I look at the question, like, why are there no Hebrew versions of the Gospels? And if you look at a number of like, sites here that discuss this issue, nobody ever brings up like information that says, okay, well, here's one that dates from this period of the same period of the earliest Greek text that was in Hebrew or Aramaic. And, the issue here is, someone could say, well, why does it really matter? Like I wanted to note here, then this Catholic Answers, it says there's no evidence of an Aramaic or Hebrew original of the Matthew's Gospel. It is a futile to argue that work originally appeared in Aramaic. So the Catholic Church is one of the oldest forms of Christianity that started after the Jewish form of Christianity died out, and could be identifiable. So the question is, well, why? If they were such scholars in Torah, why were they not writing anything in Hebrew? Um, So I want to go back to this video here. And that's the important point. And I've done in other videos, which I'll post in the description, about the fact that, that the earliest Jewish Christians died out within 2 generations of their start. So there's no evidence of what he's saying here, that they were spreading Torah and that Jesus was spreading Torah. Again, we don't have any evidence of who, the historical Jesus was. We only have the legendary mythical Jesus that's in the New Testament.
The knowledge of the Torah to the Gentiles.
This is also wrong, because if you look at like the writings of Paul, Paul was the one who's credited with actually taking, the ideas that he had to the non-Jewish world. But we also know that Paul was not trying to teach them Torah, that he was actually teaching the opposite of the Torah. So this is also something where I think he's kind of, the missionary here, I think he's kind of working over this guy here because the guy, maybe doesn't know about this history of the New Testament. And that's one of the things I think Rabbi Tovia Singer at one point was saying, that every Jew should know the history of the New Testament so that when these kind of claims come up, you know how to respond to them. you know, but this is not true what he's saying here. They did not try to take the Torah to the rest of the world. Paul did everything he could to say in the New Testament writings that the Torah is not something that should be kept by the rest of the world. And he's had a lot of bad things to say about the Torah. And nowhere in the New Testament in the Gospels does Jesus ever talk about taking it to the non-Jewish world. And there's no evidence that they ever went to the non-Jewish world and convinced them to keep Torah. They had them keeping their own thing, which was something else.
To the rest of the world. And so if one of the missions of the Messiah is to bring the knowledge of the Torah to the world, not just to the Jewish people, to the world, we believe that he accomplished that with his coming, because now there are billions of non-Jewish people all over the world that believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because of Jesus, because of the Jewish man that came.
Okay, so this is where I would bring up a problem with this. Okay, so the issue here is like one very fundamental problematic one. Because and the guy who's Orthodox who will bring up this point, the Rambam brings up a very interesting point in the Mishnah Torah, and he says that on one side, we know that there were a lot of bad things that came out of the start of Christianity. A lot of Jews died and were killed and massacred during like the Inquisitions and things like that. But he says that okay, in the two senses, that essentially, when Christianity got started and when Islam got started equally, that they helped spread the idea of the Torah to the world. And that at some point that knowledge will be something that the creator of all things uses when there is a real leader amongst the Jewish people who's of Davidic descent. So the thing is that Jesus did not spread anything here. Paul was the one who went around spreading his ideas to the non-Jewish world. Now, again, he didn't succeed in doing it all, on his own. They had to do a lot of like acceptance of like, paganism in order for that to happen. Now, the other thing is that, again, as I said before, we can talk all what we want about what the New Testament claims Jesus did or didn't do, but when we look at history, we don't see anything that proves any of that stuff. So that's one of the things that I think is important in the response here, that, a person has to be very particular about the idea that, okay, well, that's what you in that text says, but in terms of reality, we know that they didn't keep the Torah. That was actually a big issue in the New Testament and the writings. Whoever authored it made this a big issue, where at one point there was this question of whether the non-Jews should keep the Torah, and then the New Testament, it's like, no, they shouldn't. And we know that historically speaking, Christians don't keep the Torah. So the only thing you could say is the influences of Jews in one form or the other, right or wrong, created a scenario where, for example, the knowledge of the creator of all things went out into the world in two directions. One direction is amongst Christianity. One direction is amongst Islam, because according to some, scholars, the earliest, Muslims, for example, Muhammad was actually taught by Jews. So you have to, the credit there is that, the existence of Jews being in the world caused this to happen, even if it kind of went down the wrong path, for example. So that's one of the things that, the man here, if I understand correctly, he's also a part of the Lubavitch movement. And the Rebbe, who was the rabbi of the Lubavitch movement, who passed away in 94, he also did a lot to like try to spread, the Noahide laws to the non-Jewish world. So we can make the same, statement about him, that, hey, well, that's someone who was willing to speak to both Jews and non-Jews, and he wasn't the only one, so, we have to be very careful with the way that this is approached.
To bring not just the Torah, but also an elevated form of the Torah.
It's amazing because what you said, Maimonides say that.
Yes, but Maimonides came, how many, 1,000 years later?
No. He's talking about Jesus.
Yes.
Maimonides said, we don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah,
okay,
because he didn't spread the Torah and the mitzvot in the world. it's even the contrary. Because of the religion of Christianity, there was a lot of blood.
Absolutely. And this is a good point.
Right. And he's saying, but Maimonides is asking a question, a very good question. Is say, but why God sent Jesus? He succeeded. It's a big company. How do you say?
He collected.
He launched a big company. It's a success. Right. Why did God let him success?
Okay.
So Maimonides say that. Say, even if we don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and same for Muhammad.
Yeah.
But they spread an idea of one God.
Right.
And that brings the world closer to the real Messiah.
So this is a very good point. I'm glad he brought that up because this is there's a little tweaking I would do to what he said about what Rambam wrote in the Mishnah Torah about this. But the thing is, the Rambam does deal with this issue of, okay, well, if we know that all these bad things happened when Christianity got started and these bad things fell upon the Jewish people, and a lot of Jewish blood was spilled, from various Christians who the non-Jewish Christians who took on this religion after the Jewish part of it disappeared. Why exactly did the creator of all things let that happen? And the Rambam does say that comparing Christianity and Islam together equally, that the existence of them helps spread the word to kind of get the word out about the basic elements of, for example, this idea of who Hashem is, and who is the one that, who are the people who initially, brought this knowledge of Hashem to the world. And he basically says that at some point it'll make it easier for when the real, Davidic king, comes about, when the real, Mashiach, if you will, comes about, it'll be easier for the world to understand what they're looking at, rather than, for example, in a situation where everybody's like doing what's called avodah zarah, or if you want to say in English, idolatry, and have no idea what they're even looking at. Where, for example, when you have a Jewish leader, and this is the way the Rambam explains it, when you have a Jewish leader who is, standing up essentially for the Torah and teaching Torah according to, the sources of the Torah and, the oral understanding of the Torah, and when you have that leader, able to lead, and when he does certain things and is leading certain things, you can say potentially that's Mashiach. But then he says that if he doesn't accomplish it, if he passes away, if he's killed, or something like that, then you can say, well, he was a potential, but he's not Mashiach because of the fact that he died. He didn't accomplish the goal. But the Rambam says that if you have someone who does all these things, and then he accomplishes the act of bringing the people of Israel back to the land of Israel, and he accomplishes the idea of building, of causing or building the temple to be rebuilt in the Jerusalem, and he, basically is able to succeed, then you could say that that's definitely Mashiach because of the fact that he succeeded at all of the standards that the creator of all things put in place. And when the world knows that this, situation is the situation the creator, put in place, and knows exactly who the creator is, and knows that what the true Torah is, then and only then you can say that this is Mashiach because of the fact that he accomplished every single goal that's there, and there's no reversing it. So meaning that after this point, after the person who exists to be this Jewish leader of Davidic ancestry, there is no, there is no exile. There's no additional exile. There's no additional war against the Jewish people because of the fact that that's it. Everything that needs to be accomplished to restart this idea, of a Jewish kingdom in the land of Israel. That's it. There's nothing more. But the minute that, for example, you have someone who supposedly is going that route, and if he's doing certain things, you could say potentially. But the minute that he fails or doesn't accomplish it or passes away, without it happening, you can say, okay, well, he was a potential, but he's not the one. And that's what he's getting at here. And that's where I would stress a little bit more of that because it can be misunderstood by someone like the missionary.
Okay. Now, about Messiah, I believe there is a Messiah.
Okay.
And
a person.
And we have another candidate. And that brings me to invite you to go to the 17th of the street.
Okay.
There is a small shul where the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I'm sure you heard about.
Yes, very much.
Daven and prayed and teached in the 30s. In the, how do you say?
In the 1930s?
Yes, in the 1930s.
Yes.
And for me...
Are you Chabad?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Okay.
For me, this man is perfectly standing in the standard of the Messiah as we can read it in the Rambam.
Okay, so this is an interesting thing, and I find this interesting when this gets brought up, because as some people know that there are certain Lubavitch who believe that the Rebbe, even though he passed away, is still the Mashiach. And I know that sometimes there are Christians and missionaries who bring this up, this idea of this, this group of this sect of Lubavitch who believe that the Rebbe, even though he passed away, is Mashiach. But I find it interesting when you see it in contrast, like face to face. Um, because on one end, you have someone saying, well, Jesus meets this standard. And then they come up with all these standards. And that's where if you challenge it and say, well, historically speaking, show me where these standards were met. And then you have someone who says, okay, well, here is a modern individual, a modern Jewish leader who was seen keeping Torah, seen teaching Torah, and did a lot to bring Jews back to the fold who were lost, to the Torah, and also did a lot to try to convince non-Jews to like keep the seven Noahide laws. That's where if a person pushes this argument hard enough, the missionary and the person kind of, they're kind of almost over outbalancing each other. Again, personally, I don't, believe in that. I don't hold by that myself. But it's an interesting contrast. And that's where I would like to end this video actually. And I may do like the rest of the video at some point because, like I say, I like the idea that he invited this missionary to, to the Chabad there in order to like, to put on tefillin at one point. The guy's like, yeah, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Probably, I don't know if he ever did that. He probably didn't. But also, bringing up this idea that, for this guy saying is for him, the Lubavitch Rebbe, is basically a candidate, for this, situation. And according, he says according to the Rambam, I mean, again, I don't really hold by that personally. And if you really read the Rambam in Hebrew, there's some issues there because, like I said before, the Rambam explains that if the person dies, then you can say they were like potentially. So you could say that this person was doing the things that potentially the that were required to be done, but the minute they pass away, it's like okay, well, they were just someone doing the work, but it wasn't them. They're not the person. Which is fine. These things happen, and when someone succeeds at it, that'll be the person, and we'll all be in the right state to be in that situation to be happy with it. So this is Ehav from the Chronicles of Ehav. Again, I may come back and do a part two for the rest of this video, but I got a couple other ones that I want to get into. So take care. Thank you for listening and bye.